Great. Well, I'll go ahead and, in the interest of time, get us started here today. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Louise Bedsworth. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Law, Energy, and the Environment at Berkeley Law. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn on California offshore wind and what will happen next. As many of you are aware, CLEE is a policy research center within the law school at Berkeley. We help to link the expertise and creativity of the Berkeley law community and the wider campus with policymakers and decision makers and other stakeholders to help advance pragmatic and practical policy solutions to some of our biggest environmental challenges. We work with government, business, and the nonprofit sector to solve urgent problems that require innovative and often interdisciplinary approaches. Through our Lunch and Learn series, we host a series of conversations on a range of environmental topics, including unpacking complex and pressing policy issues and sharing some innovative new research findings. Our Lunch and Learn series is made possible by our law firm partners, Wilson Sonsini, Hanson Bridget, and Oric. Today, I am really excited that we are going to be talking about a really important active policy area here in California, which is the development of offshore wind. Late last year, California held its first lease sales for offshore wind development off the central and northern coast of the state. And the California Energy Commission is actively engaged in a strategic planning process looking over the long term at offshore wind development. So today we're going to speak with folks who have been involved with the lease process and take a look at what's happened and what's coming next in this very dynamic policy environment. I'm thrilled to be able to turn it over to two of our research fellows here at CLEE who have been leading our work on offshore wind. Katie Siegel, who will kick things off, providing some background on this work, who will then introduce our speakers, and then Catherine Hoff, who's going to help moderate some questions and answers from all of you. So again, thank you so much for joining us and look forward to today's conversation. I'll turn it over to you, Katie.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Louise. And thank you everyone for joining and taking a bit of your afternoon to talk with us today about offshore wind, which, as I think many of us can agree, is a very exciting topic. And we're thrilled to be joined by three incredible panelists today. I'll introduce them in just a second, but first I wanted to give you a quick rundown of the agenda so you can know what to expect. So first, I'll just be giving a really brief overview of CLEE's offshore wind related work. Then I'll turn it over to our panelists for them to each give a really brief introduction of who they are, what they're working on, and what their organization is doing in the California offshore wind space. Then we'll have a moderated panel discussion, which I'll be facilitating with the panelists. And then last but not least, we'll have a lot of time reserved for your questions from the audience. And so we really encourage you to be thinking of questions as we go along. If you do have a question, could you please put it in the Q&A section down at the bottom of your Zoom screen? And that's where we'll be monitoring the questions and making sure that we have a lot of time to get to all of them. So don't forget to put those in. And can we go to the next slide, please? So to start, I just wanted to give everyone a sense of what CLEE's been up to in the offshore wind space. So CLEE started working on offshore wind a couple years ago, way before a lot of the conversation in California was happening more openly. And we really focus on holding stakeholder dialogues and conversations for people to discuss some of the pressing issues in offshore wind planning and policy making. And so in addition to series like this one, we also host convenings and workshops for various stakeholders, and we conduct stakeholder engagement, such as through one-on-one interviews with different groups who are engaged in offshore wind. We've published a few different reports and publications, which you can find on our website, and I know my colleague Catherine will be sharing a link in a second. We've recently published a white paper summarizing our stakeholder engagement process throughout 2022. So I really encourage you to take a quick look at that just to understand kind of where different parties are in this process. And we also will be publishing some additional reports and briefs and communications throughout the coming year. So keep an eye out if you're interested. And we're able to do all this through generous support from the Energy Foundation. So we really appreciate their support and encourage you to, again, keep a close eye on the website. So with that, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our three speakers. I think I'll do one at a time so that they can each then introduce themselves and fill us in with a couple minutes of what they're working on. So first, we have Sara Guiltinan from the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. And Sara will be telling us a little bit about what BOEM's been up to. So Sara, take it away.
Yep. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for having me as a panelist today. I'm really thrilled to be here. So I'm Sara Guiltinan, and my organization is the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. BOEM is the lead regulatory agency for offshore wind energy development in federal waters. Our role is to provide energy developers like my fellow panelists representing Equinor and RWE. We provide them access to the offshore wind resource by issuing leases. And we also ensure that energy development is done responsibly by reviewing developers' plans. Our regulatory regime includes consultation with tribal, state, and local governments, ocean users, communities, the interested public, and it also includes compliance with multiple laws and regulations. We also must ensure that the nation receives a fair return for the development of offshore wind energy. So me as an individual, I work for BOEM's Pacific Regional Office. Our area of jurisdiction is federal waters offshore Hawaii, Washington, Oregon, and California. And that includes the 5 new offshore wind lease areas off Northern and Central California. I've been with the BOEM Pacific Regional Office for 12 years now. I've served in a variety of roles in that time. Currently, I'm a renewable energy specialist, and I'm the project coordinator for the new California offshore wind leases. Just on a personal note, I'm proud to be born and raised in Southern California. Thanks again.
And Sara, I'm so sorry, my fault. I completely forgot to say a bit about your background. So a bit out of order, but I'd love to share a little bit about that now. So Sara joined BOEM as a Presidential Management Fellow in 2011 and has served several roles supporting BOEM's various programs, including Pacific Region Tribal Liaison Officer, Leasing Specialist, and Socioeconomic Subject Matter Expert. And we're really excited to have Sara here today because of all the background that she just shared and all the work that BOEM is doing. So thank you, Sara. I'm sorry about that. Next up, we have Paul James Sørheim, and Paul James is joining us from Equinor. So Paul, if you want to give your quick introduction.
Yeah, thank you, Katie, and thanks for the opportunity to join this panel today. And I just maybe start off by saying I applaud the excellent work that CLEE is doing in the offshore wind space. It's incredibly important and very much appreciated by all the stakeholders working in this space. I just wanted to start off by saying that and encourage everyone to look at the webpage and go through the reports because they're very insightful and thoughtful assessments that have been prepared. So my name is Paul James Sørheim. I'm the project manager in Equinor, responsible for California and the West Coast. I've been based in San Francisco since December of last year. And was responsible for leading the bid team, which is very much a team effort involving lots of discipline experts across the entire Equinor organization, located not only in the US, but in Norway and other parts of Europe, in fact. And just by ways of introduction in terms of Equinor, for those not familiar, Equinor is a leader in the energy transition space. We have 50 years of experience, in fact, working as a broad energies provider with a Norwegian heritage. Our HQ is in Stavanger, Norway, and really what we're doing here is trying to be part of this transition in a big and impactful way. I'm very much focused on an offshore wind space in particular. When it comes to the US, we have a presence on the East Coast, established for some time now, developing our flagship projects, Empire and Beacon Wind, as you can see here on the slide. And then we're obviously very thrilled very recently to have secured a lease on the West Coast, which I'll come to on the next slide. But just this slide is showing, Equinor is very much a global company, operations in over 30 countries. And when it comes to the floating offshore wind space, we've really been a pioneer with projects in Europe and specifically in Norway, more recently, we commissioned the Tampen project, which is actually the world's largest current floating offshore wind development project at 88 megawatts. So we're proud of that achievement, but obviously looking ahead to building a lot more projects, including on the West Coast moving forward. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So as said, we're really thrilled to have secured a lease on the US West Coast. We see this as a very interesting market opportunity, and there's really an opportunity here for the entire US West Coast to be at the real forefront of the industrial development of offshore wind globally as well. We've secured the westernmost lease off the central coast of Morro Bay here, as you can see, lease P0563. We think this lease has the potential of developing up to 2 gigawatts of capacity. The water depths are significant here, beyond 1,000 meters water depth. So that will require, technology qualification programs and a lot of rigorous studies and analysis. But we are confident that there's a pathway through this, obviously working with all relevant stakeholders as we move forward in developing this lease. But again, incredibly excited to have secured that lease. And then just lastly, on the final slide here, just in terms of stating that very clearly Equinor is focused on a community-based development model as we approach developing our position in California, and really we have a strong commitment to respecting the environment that is involved and impacted by these areas. Creating local jobs and working closely with local unions is also incredibly important for us. And finally, what I'd highlight from this list is, this is very much a collaborative effort that is needed to build an industry in California and on the West Coast, and working with all the impacted stakeholders. Some of them are listed here, obviously fisheries, environmental justice, and the tribal communities, just to mention a few, is incredibly important for Equinor, and it's in our DNA and very much our way of working. So with that, I've given you a brief introduction to Equinor and our focus, but I'd just like to stress we're really excited to be part of this journey going forward. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Paul James. We now have James Sun from RWE Renewables. James is joining us by phone, and I'll just give a quick overview of a little bit of James's background before he can explain a little bit more about RWE. So James grew up in Marin in LA and has 9 years of experience in offshore wind, which started out in Europe when the industry was just starting to scale rapidly. James came back to the US several years ago to help develop our homegrown offshore wind industry, and he's currently the development director for RWE's project, which was recently won in Humboldt. So James, if you could give us a little bit more background about what you're working on, that'd be great.
Thank you very much, and great to meet everyone audibly, even if I couldn't have got the visual to work today. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, brilliant. Yes, so thank you for that background personally. And I, being a native Californian, I do feel extremely proud that my home state has got to this really significant milestone in developing this exciting new industry. And just by way of introduction to the company, RWE originated 125 years ago as a regional utility in Germany, but of course in the intervening time has really expanded to have a global footprint where we are active in all the major markets around the world. We are a mission-driven company to supply the world with clean energy for a sustainable future. It is a mission that is not just espoused by the company, but really dear and near to the hearts of myself and my colleagues as well. And we feel that this global footprint is important because climate change is really a global issue that needs to be tackled at that kind of scale, no matter where you are. We have, so globally speaking, we're the second largest offshore wind developer. And we recently completed an acquisition of Con Ed in the US. And as a consequence of that, we are also within the US, the second largest solar developer. The US is really one of our core markets. We've been here for almost 20 years. We have about 8 gigawatts of operating assets, all of that solar, onshore wind, battery storage. If you look at our global portfolio of renewable projects, the US actually is the largest share of that. So we really do see the US as one of our core markets. For offshore wind, we're a relatively more recent entrant into the US market, having secured a lease in the Atlantic initially early last year off the coast of New York and New Jersey. It's a company that is called Community Offshore Wind. It's a joint venture with our partners, National Grid. We also have a demonstration or research project, which is a floating project off the coast of Maine as well. And we're also super excited to have secured this lease in California to be among the first generation of leaseholders for offshore wind in my home state. Our lease, I think there might have been a map shown earlier. Our lease is in the northern part of California off the coast of Humboldt. And so that is where the focus of our development activities are concentrated. We do also really kind of take seriously this community-based approach to development. We have started the outreach to really get to know the local stakeholders and local community members, really in a listening mode to understand who they are, what their priorities are, what their needs are, so we can start to kind of develop those relationships and factor in those issues as we continue the long process of developing our design, understanding the timescale, and how can we actually undertake this development activity. So I'll probably just finish there and then look forward to the Q&A section.
Great, thank you so much. That's really helpful to hear. So thank you to all three of our panelists for giving us that introduction. And we're going to start a panel discussion. So I have some pre-made questions, but I still encourage everyone to keep putting their questions into the Q&A for when we open it up to audience questions. So be thinking of what questions you have for our three panelists. So the first question I have is for Sara. And I'm wondering, Sara, if you can just share a little bit more background about what happened in December, especially for folks who are new to the offshore wind conversation. Can you get us up to speed on the importance of the auction? How did we get to that point? And what are we looking at happening next?
Happy to, yeah. So, and hopefully we can get a slide up. Well, wonderful. That'll show a map of the California lease areas and the list of the provisional winners. So the California offshore wind lease auction was held on December 6th and 7th of last year. It was for 5 lease areas. They're shown on this slide here. 2 areas offshore Humboldt Bay in Northern California, and 3 northwest of Morro Bay in Central California. The auction lasted a day and a half, and it drew high bids totaling $757.1 million. From the 5 companies listed on this slide, including, of course, Equinor and RWE. The auction was a big deal. It was the first in California, first for the West Coast, first in the Pacific Ocean for the US, and the first commercial wind lease sale to support floating offshore wind technology. So the waters of the Pacific Ocean are deep, and we expect that floating wind technology will be deployed here. And so that is a new thing and a big deal for the nation. The auction itself, it only lasted a day and a half, but it was the culmination of years of planning and analysis and outreach and coordination and engagement, lots of talking. So starting in 2016, BOEM engaged with our intergovernmental partners in tribal, state, federal, and local governments, and with the broad swath of other ocean users, with communities, all interested parties, really. And that engagement informed ultimately the identification of these areas suitable for leasing. It also informed our understanding of potential impacts and the benefits of leasing, and then the format that this auction took and the lease requirements that the lessees will have to fulfill. As far as what happens next, the leases have to actually be issued and executed so that the 5 provisional winners can actually become official lessees. So when BOEM issues these leases to the provisional winners, they then have to pay the balance of their auction bids, and that those funds go directly to the US Treasury, same place that our taxes go. They complete a few other requirements, and then BOEM can execute the leases. At that point, once the leases are executed, the lessees start fulfilling their lease requirements and conducting activities on their leaseholds. So they'll have several near-term lease obligations, and those include communications plans, engagement efforts. So as we've heard, some of the companies have already begun those efforts, and they'll also start submitting their survey plans to BOEM. So that's kind of a high-level overview and snapshot of the lease sale.
Great, thank you so much, Sara. It's really helpful to see that map and to see where all the lease sales happened. So to James and to Paul James, I'm wondering if you could, maybe James first and then Paul James, just so there's some order, if you could share a little bit more about the context of your work after the lease sale happened and how you plan to approach the project. You both shared a bit of that in your intros, but I'm wondering if there's any additional detail that you have post-auction. What does that world look like for you?
Sure, of course. Happy to make a start. So having won the lease is an important milestone, but still, one of a number of steps that need to happen to kind of fully develop the project. The first of which would be to really get a better understanding of the area and the space of our lease. So we need to start planning survey activities to measure better the wind conditions, the wave conditions, what the seabed looks like. We also need to obviously understand what the sort of area of the ports might look like in their capability to support offshore wind as well. So those are the kind of obvious next steps that we're planning now and would need to be undertaking in the near-ish future. But of course, the leasing itself, as I said, is an important step, but there are other market-related elements that also require a lot of attention. So California has gone a long way to plan a pathway to achieve, net zero clean energy by 2045. However, I guess the planning process does have some barriers to kind of really make a technology like offshore wind sort of integrate successfully, by which I mean, identifying what that offshore wind need is in the integrated resource planning that the CPUC is leading is a very, very important step. But also how would you sell the power to the energy users in California is another question that we're also kind of trying to understand better and how to improve that situation. Right now, or in the last 10 years, the buyer base in California has really fragmented from 3 large investor-owned utilities and some municipal utilities to a very, very complicated patchwork of smaller buyers, roughly county-size community choice aggregators. And the incentives for how these load-serving entities identify their needs and procure what they need, I think there's quite a lot of development that could benefit the state in terms of making sure that the way that the load-serving entities buy power actually does set the state as a whole on a path to achieving the zero carbon goals that it set for itself. We do think that there are some market kind of mechanisms that need to be developed. For example, the governor has proposed the concept of a central procurement agency as a backstop, in case the load-serving entities, doing what they do, don't procure enough or fast enough of the right basket of resources, then having some kind of backstop to make sure that the shortfall is made up to keep the state on its path to its policy goals, I think is a very worthwhile kind of mechanism to consider. So that's just one example in terms of the policy work that is ongoing and we're very actively engaged in. And specifically, I guess, for the northern coast region where our lease area is, transmission is another really kind of urgent topic. Transmission, the grid is just very sparse in that part of the state and just doesn't have sufficient capacity to take in or absorb a fairly large project off the coast. Our project is a little bit smaller than Equinor's, I think. Ours is maybe around the 1.6 gigawatt mark, but still that's much, much larger than what the existing grid is capable of absorbing. So it's urgent that the state and CAISO and other relevant agencies and stakeholders really start the planning process to make sure that, that the transmission itself doesn't become like a really significant bottleneck in the program of realizing the offshore wind projects to deliver the clean energy at scale that California needs to achieve its policy goals. So maybe I can kind of just stop there as an illustration of the types of flavors of activities we're doing, and then we can obviously go into more detail later on.
Yeah, no, those are really great points. I mean, touching on transmission and the state goals and power purchase agreements, we definitely want to get into more detail on those if we have time later on. But maybe for now, I'll pass it along to Paul James if you have anything along those lines to add.
Yeah, I think there was great points made by James here in terms of the barriers to establishing an offshore wind market and industry in California. So a lot of the key points were raised on James' remarks there. I'd maybe just add that obviously working very closely with all the relevant state and regulatory agencies is the recipes for success here. So we're very focused on the work that's ongoing now in the form of this strategic plan that the CEC is developing over the coming months, intending to publish that strategic plan before the summer. And that strategic plan is really seeking to address all the issues that were presented by James there when it comes to procurement mechanism, when it comes to permitting, ports, and then we see the supply chain as well. So, getting progress on those issues, I think, is critically important for moving the agenda forward in California. And we're encouraged to see specifically on the route to market and the procurement mechanism that's been mentioned here that the governor has started a process there and put forward the outlines of a proposal, and that's very much needed because these are large-scale projects requiring a high degree of capital investment. So there needs to be some certainty around the offtake there as we move forward in order to send the right signal to the market, but also make an attractive sort of investment climate for these types of projects. So I think I'll leave it at that for now, and I'm happy to field any questions that may come up.
Great. No, thank you for that. And as a reminder to our participants, please do continue to put your questions in the Q&A. We'll get to those very shortly. And it's a great point about, aligning with the California Energy Commission's forthcoming strategic plan, which we're expecting to see in June of this year. So yeah, definitely that is front of mind for many of the questions you both raised. But I wanted to turn it back over to Sara. Sara, I was wondering if you can help us understand and discuss some of the bid credits and lease stipulations that went into the final sale notice of the leases, things around workforce or domestic supply chain. Can you kind of walk us through BOEM's perspective on that?
Yeah, happy to. There's about 26 pages worth of contractual language about lease stipulations in the leases. So I'll spare you all that level of detail, but just to highlight, as you mentioned, the bidding credits. So BOEM offered 3 types of bidding credits in the California auction. First is around workforce training and supply chain development. So bidders could receive a credit of 20% on top of their cash bid in the auction in exchange for a commitment to support workforce training programs for the domestic floating offshore wind industry, to support development of a domestic supply chain for the floating wind industry, or both. It's sort of an and or type of credit. So a similar type of credit was also included in the May 2022 BOEM offshore wind auction off the Carolinas in the Atlantic. It's also proposed for the upcoming wind auction in the Gulf of Mexico. So it's been used before, but the California credit is unique in that it's targeted for the floating offshore wind industry. As I mentioned before, we expect floating wind technology to be used in these deep Pacific waters. And the credit will result in over $117 million in investments to fill these critical needs in the floating wind workforce and supply chain. So that's the first one. And then there were two types of credits offered for community benefit agreements. The first is specific to the lease areas. So it's called the Lease Area Use CBA for short credit. That was for 5% on top of bidders' cash bids in exchange for a commitment to execute a community benefit agreement with communities who might be impacted. So these can be stakeholder groups, tribal entities, other types of communities who actually use that geographic space of the lease area, or they use the resources that are harvested from them. So fish come to mind for that. So this community benefit agreement would help to alleviate the impacts by the lessee's potential offshore wind development in those spaces. And then the other type of community benefit agreement credit is for general CBAs, another 5% on top of the cash bids. And this is for an agreement with communities that are expected to be affected by development. The impacts could be on the marine, coastal, or the human environment. And that general CBA basically addresses impacts that are not otherwise addressed in the lease area use CBA, kind of covers everything else. BOEM really pushed the envelope with those community benefit agreement bidding credits, and they were included in response to strong recommendations that BOEM have these credits to incentivize developers to invest time and resources into collaborative efforts with communities who may be impacted and ensure that benefits flow equitably to those communities. So I feel like I'm going long on the bidding credits alone, but just really quickly on other types of lease stipulations. The leases include requirements for robust engagement by the lessees with all tribes and parties who are affected by lease activities. And lessees are expected to coordinate their engagement as much as possible to reduce that consultation burden that's put on tribes and parties. Lessees have to report on their engagement activities. There's a stipulation that lessees make every reasonable effort to enter into project labor agreements. And there is a whole suite of other stipulations unique to California that incorporate the California Coastal Commission's conditions. They have authorities under the Coastal Zone Management Act that were incorporated into the leases. So broadly, their conditions are intended to ensure environmental protections, minimize negative impacts on other ocean users, and promote environmental justice for underserved communities. So I'll stop there, but there's a lot more to talk about if folks are interested.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Sara. And that is really interesting to see what BOEM decided to do for California as compared to maybe some of the previous auctions on the East Coast, as you said, pushing the envelope. So really excited to talk more about that if we have some time. I think we have time for one more question now before I turn it over to my colleague, Catherine, who will be guiding the audience Q&A. So final reminder, please do put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom. So this is for Paul James, and maybe we'll start this time with Paul James. Could you share a little bit about how you plan to approach things like community benefits agreements or working with labor? I know not all of that is set in stone, but if you can give us a sense of like how you're approaching those questions, we'd be really curious to learn that.
Yes, thank you for that, Katie. And I just maybe start off by saying that we're very committed to the conceptual strategy that we've submitted to BOEM as part of our ongoing commitments to stakeholder engagement going forward. So the pages that were referred to here by Sara have been well understood and something that we are encouraged to see coming as an obligation. We see that as, again, something we're very committed to doing going forward. I think, you know, the whole stakeholder landscape in California, there's many levels to it. So I think first and foremost at the state level, as I'd mentioned already, you know, the engagements that we're having with the CEC in particular, as coordinating all the relevant regulatory agencies is an important piece of this. And then as we move our way down to kind of more regional forums for stakeholders, that's also important for us and in our plans to engage more deeply as we move forward. And you know, on the Central Coast, there's a plethora of stakeholders that we need to kind of get in dialogue with, and we're very committed to do so. But we're also humble to the fact that, you know, we need to take time to have the right conversations and really to map the concerns and issues. So that's what we're in the process of doing as we speak. And I think, you know, hopefully as we mature our strategies and plans, you know, we can obviously share that more broadly. But again, this is very much in Equinor's DNA, and it's the community-based model, as I mentioned, is very central to our way of working. But we're very much an early phase of the process here, and we'll be ramping up our conversations as we move forward, and hopefully we get the formal lease sign off in May from BOEM, so we can kind of kick off even further into those discussions as we move forward. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. James, do you have any perspective to add around community benefits and engagement?
Sure. I mean, I guess the principles that Sara outlined of what it was trying to achieve in terms of minimizing the impact to the environment, minimizing the impact on the local communities, and maximizing the benefits and targeting environmental justice, very much, you know, very central to the way that RWE works anyway. And we definitely welcome the structure of the bidding credit to help, I guess, achieve a certain level of consistency with all the different developers and how that might impact California communities as a whole. But like Paul James said, you know, we are very early in the process. Our business model is to really kind of cover the full cycle of these projects. We get in early on the development stages, we do the construction, and then we own and operate these assets for their 30+ years lifetime. And so, you know, when you kind of look at that picture, it is really a long-term view. And we really are incentivized to take that long-term view when we kind of engage with local communities and kind of look for those long-lasting impacts that we can have and be responsible community members for a whole generation. And so we're kicking off our process really, I think Paul James mentioned this, in a humble way. And we are in a listening mode because we do really recognize the importance of getting to know the local community members, understanding what their concerns are, understanding what their priorities are, so that we can really respond to those. And there really is no shortcut to this process, but just spending time in the communities to build up those relationships and that knowledge. And so this is really what we are prioritizing. And this is kind of one of the early Lego pieces that will help us build a strategy that is really aligned and compatible with the community that we are finding ourselves in Northern California.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And thank you all for sharing those thoughts. I really like that visual of a Lego piece. It is such a process, and we are, there's so much work has been done and so much work left to go. So yeah, we're one little Lego piece in the great ocean of Legos, I guess, if anyone else likes that visual. Next, I'm going to pass the mic over to my colleague, Catherine Hopp, who is going to guide us through some of the questions that you all have been putting into the chat or into the Q&A function, my bad. This is not too late, so please do continue to put questions in. And with that, I'll pass it off to Catherine.
Thanks so much, Katie, and thanks to those who have submitted questions. Please feel free to keep doing so. As Katie said, We have a lot of questions on transmission and offtake. So here we go with the first one. What recommendations would you have for legislators and regulators as they consider opportunities to support faster deployment of transmission projects that will be needed to connect the offshore wind farms to the grid? And I'm just going to lump two together specifically for you, James, and RWE. What are your thoughts about transmission for North Coast specifically? Would RWE develop transmission itself or contract with others or rely on the state to arrange transmission?
Thank you for that great question. I guess where I would start is that, offshore wind is an important tool in a diversified toolbox of energy tools that California really needs to get to its policy goals of achieving net zero by 2045. And because a lot of the resource for offshore wind, a lot of the great wind resources happen to be concentrated in the northern coast, where the demand is fairly small. So the local population is relatively small. So for the amount of generation that is available on the north coast, you really have to think of it as not just benefiting the immediate area adjacent to our project, but really benefiting California as a whole. And so I think for that kind of reason, we really look at transmission as something that is connecting a resource that will benefit all of California. And so we are working closely with CAISO. We're contributing to the comments to shape that the transmission planning process to really kind of find out what is the best solution for that region. And I think our view is that because the benefit is for all of California, it really sort of should be sort of seen in that way, that transmission isn't just for a project, but really for a strategic asset for the rest of the state. But in terms of like the planning process, it is difficult to plan in a piecemeal way. Transmission will be tricky to find the right solution. It will be costly. And it will be difficult to permit, meaning that it will take a long time. So if the state approached this in a piecemeal way, we may never get there, or we just might not get there in time to really kind of set California on a path, on a timely pathway to achieve those goals. So I would very much encourage the state to take a more strategic view on how it plans transmission, because of the long lead times that are needed. To look at this as not just kind of plugging one project, but how do you do it in a way that sort of, again, going back to the Lego analogy, you might put the first couple of pieces of Lego in place, but that enables the next few pieces to get put in place more easily, because the truth is, a lot of the gigawatts of offshore wind will come from the northern coast. And so I would encourage the state to look at the transmission picture in that way.
Thanks, James. Paul James, I want to give you a chance to weigh in too on anything that you think legislators and state regulators should be doing to speed the plan for comprehensive transmission for offshore wind.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. I think James, the Lego analogy is brilliant, because there's lots of pieces of this puzzle that need to all fit together, and transmission is one of those big topics that needs to be addressed in a comprehensive way. And we appreciate, the North Coast, I think, has got its fair share of the wind resources, but on the Central Coast as well, the wind blows in a good fashion there as well, to put it like that. So we do also see similar types of issue, less sort of exaggerated on the Central Coast. But I think given the pipeline of projects that we're discussing here now, if we add up the numbers, there's significant need for investment upgrades also along the Central Coast. So looking at the totality of the system needs to drive that planning process in an expedited manner. I think I would kind of encourage legislators to look at the totality of the system needs to make sure that we're not just solving for the short term, but the system that's being built out is also for the longer term ambitions that the state has, and those are very significant and the most ambitious in the country. So thinking holistically around grid and looking on transmission, not only within state California, but also extending north to Oregon as well, I think is naturally going to be part of the conversation going forward. But again, I would echo comments made by James, but also stressing the need to think holistically around grid needs longer term here.
Thanks,
That's a great point, Paul James. If I can just quickly add, I really like what Paul James said about holistic approach and holistic view, because what I fear is that the business as usual practices of how transmission planning works and the scale at which things are looked at just might be too small, too short term, for example, for the state to take that holistic view, longer time frame, kind of bigger scale, and so I think that maybe if there is a message for the legislators, might be that if the business as usual ways of planning this ends up looking too piecemeal, and you may end up missing the chance to get to those holistic views or strategic goals, then that is an area where legislators may need to kind of sort of step in to intervene in some way.
Thanks, James. I appreciate both of your calls for holistic planning and vision on the transmission front. I know we have a lot of questions in the queue. I'm going to switch over and let Sara have the mic again. Sara, can you explain to us in layman's terms, because there are a lot of acronyms in this process, what happens next in terms of the site assessment plan process and the COP process?
Sure, yes. Each agency and organization has its own language for these things, so I'll try and demystify the BOEM language. So an important premise to start with is an offshore wind lease from BOEM does not allow a developer to construct any facilities. It only gives them the exclusive right to submit plans to BOEM. So let me actually frame things in terms of the site assessment phase, which is what comes next after the leases are executed. That phase can last up to 5 years, and it's when the lessees conduct different types of surveys, which James and Paul James have mentioned already, biological, geological, archaeological types of surveys, just to name a few. And then they'll collect site-specific data on each of their leaseholds to better understand the offshore wind resource at the right elevation above the sea, where the turbines will be collecting the wind energy. And they can collect other types of site-specific data as well, like wave conditions, other met ocean types of data. And we expect that met ocean data will be collected by deploying a floating meteorological buoy. Previously, meteorological towers that were bottom founded on the seafloor have been used in the Atlantic. And it's our understanding that the industry has kind of moved away from that technology. These floating met buoys are more efficient and effective in collecting that data. So that's what we expect to see here in our California leases. And they have all sorts of instrumentation on them to collect things like temperature, turbidity. They can even include acoustic devices to try and detect different types of species. So that's what we expect to see. And then before the lessees can do any of those things, conduct the surveys or deploy a buoy, they need to submit plans to BOEM for review. So that includes survey plans, and then the site assessment plan, or SAP, is what covers a meteorological buoy. So then let's assume all that happens. The plans are approved, surveys conducted, buoys deployed. All the resulting data then informs the lessee's actual wind project. that they describe that in their construction and operations plan. That's the COP in BOEM language. So this plan tells us their project design, like the number of wind turbines, how those will be anchored to the seafloor, the layout of the wind farm, safety plans, much more. These are giant plans, many pages. The BOEM then conducts a robust environmental review of that construction and operations plan, many more pages. And that also includes consultation with tribes and other regulatory agencies. Only if BOEM approves that construction operations plan or approves it with modifications can a lessee then actually construct their wind project. So it's a long process and benefits from a lot of coordination. And we're really just at the beginning phase, like James and Paul James have said.
Thanks for that, Sarah. And just for anyone who's on the webinar who is interested in weighing in on those plans, can you describe kind of the next spots for stakeholder input as BOEM reviews and then approves potentially those developer plans?
Yeah, so a lot of the analysis and input opportunities happened actually before the auction. So pre-lease, BOEM conducted environmental reviews and associated consultations on the federal actions of issuing the leases and then the reasonably foreseeable activities that come next. So the surveys and the site assessment through the Met buoys. So those have already been analyzed and the environmental assessment documents are available on BOEM's website, along with lots of other materials. So because those have already been analyzed, when we get the survey plans and the site assessment plans, we'll review them to see if they're within the scope of what we already considered. If there's anything outside of scope, then we can either go back to the applicants and say, do you want to try again and get it within scope? Or then we'll reopen analysis if they want to proceed with some activities that weren't already analyzed and considered. And that would open up sort of public comment opportunities again. And then when the construction operations plans come in, there are likely multiple comment periods associated with that as we do that robust environmental review that I mentioned. So those are kind of the public comment periods are official, there's dockets and document numbers and things like that. But also we take input anytime. We try to be accessible and transparent. And so even if there's not an active public comment period open, we really welcome input and feedback on how things are going.
Thanks so much, Sarah. That's great to hear. So everyone, inundate Sarah with your comments and questions after this webinar. Okay, let's move over to, I think we might have time for one more question. Let's move over to an environmental mitigation question. We have somebody who's interested in hearing what can be done to avoid bird collisions and fatalities with offshore wind development. I will throw it out to anyone who wants to step up to the plate. Or I can pick on someone.
Catherine, I'm happy to just on that topic. This is something that we actively study and monitor, as you can imagine, given the extent of our development and operational activities worldwide. So I won't get into any kind of specifics on this panel discussion, but happy to provide more reference material as we move forward. But certainly it's high on our radar and something we're very focused on as we're looking at our conceptual design and doing the necessary studies, because we're very much in the study phase now, to be open about that, and collecting data and really mapping, what are the risks and mitigations plans that we need to put in place to develop these offshore wind farms in a responsible manner, minimizing impacts to wildlife and marine mammals. So that's very much something that we prioritize as we move forward in this study phase of the the process. So those mitigation actions will be developed and matured as we move forward here, and to discuss more broadly as we have a plan to address those issues.
Thanks, Paul James. Because Equinor has developed other offshore wind projects, are there any measures that you've taken in other projects that you think might be applicable in this area to California?
So I think there's, each context is different. So I don't want to kind of comment specifically on mitigation actions that we would look at in the California context. We just, as I said, we really just need to study, what are the issues at stake here in our operating environment, and then develop our mitigations plans accordingly. So I think I'll leave it at that for now. And obviously, as we develop our thinking and have the plans prepared, we're obviously happy to share that more broadly.
Thank you so much. We look forward to seeing what your studies reveal. I think we have lost James, so I can't throw it over to RWE. And I think we are also at time. Don't want to keep you past the hour. So let me just start to close by thanking everyone for coming and attending. Thank you to our panelists for participating, and thank you to our sponsors, Wilson Sonsini, Hanson Bridget, Oric, and of course, our support from the Energy Foundation. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions. I know there were quite a few more, but we invite you to join us at our next Lunch and Learn, and to stay tuned on social media and the CLEE website for upcoming events. Thanks, everyone. Have a great Thursday, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much. Have a great Thursday, everyone. Bye.